The orders in my map case were dry, but my hands were not, and the orchard ahead was already lifting dust and bark with every incoming shell. I counted the seconds between impacts, wiped mud from my helmet rim, and stepped out from the wall because my timings on paper were already slipping. Behind me, the telephones were dead, the radio stuttered with static, and my superiors were shifting the guns on the strength of whether I reached that dugout in time. By the time I crossed that ground a second, then a third time, I knew the difference between a failed plan and a failed runner would never be written in any report. Late winter in the final years of the war. A cold front line in northwestern Europe. Infantry battalions hold a shallow, chewed-up sector. Mud, broken orchards, low stone walls, and lines of shell holes mark the ground between forward companies and their headquarters. Artillery from both sides feels constant, but it still comes in distinct patterns. Short harassing bursts, long-time concentrations on crossroads, and suspected assembly areas. Doctrine says that messages should move by wire, radio, and pre-arranged signals. Field telephones run forward from battalion to companies, along shallow trenches and under hedgerows. Light radios sit in dugouts, their aerials disguised against trees, chimneys, and fence posts. On paper, runners are a last resort. In practice, they are part of the daily routine. The battalion command post occupies a farmhouse just behind the forward line. Its upper floor has long since lost its roof. A tarpaulin and sheets of scavenged timber cover the worst of the gaps. In one corner of what was once a parlour, the battalion message centre operates. A rough table, a field telephone switchboard, a few lanterns, and a stack of message pads define its space. Orders arrive from regiment by wire, by radio, or by a liaison officer with mud on his boots. 2 clerks handle the paperwork. They write, stamp, record, and file. They note the time of origin, the time of receipt, and the method of transmission. The men who carry those messages forward are the battalion runners. They are assigned from the headquarters company, often from among those who know the ground best. Many once belonged to rifle platoons. They know where the low spots are in the fields, where the walls have gaps, where wire has been strung and where it has not. Their equipment is unremarkable. Rifle or carbine, helmet, are often scuffed and repainted. A webbing pouch or map case for message forms and small notebooks. Occasionally a watch, not always accurate, but close enough for timed orders. Each message follows a form. Originator, addressee, time and priority, routine, priority, immediate. Sometimes in practice, an extra word penciled in the margin by a tired clerk to emphasize urgency. On this day, an assault is planned to straighten the line along a shallow ridge beyond a shelled orchard. Forward companies will advance under a rolling pattern of supporting fire. The guns are not many, and ammunition is limited, so timings matter. Orders refer to minutes, not grand sweeping hours. The orchard lies between the battalion command post and one of the assault companies. Its trees have been splintered by months of shelling. The branches hang by strips of bark, trunks are scarred and blackened. The ground is churned, roots exposed, irrigation channels transformed into muddy ditches. Maps show the orchard as a neat grid. Reality shows broken patterns of craters and collapsed trees. Telephone wire once ran along a hedge and through the orchard to the forward company. Repeated shelling has cut it again and again. The signal section has tried to keep up. They have crawled forward with reels of cable, clipping, splicing, testing, and relaying. Each new break requires time to locate and repair. Each shell burst has a chance of undoing an hour of work in a second. In the early hours, the battalion attempts to confirm the plan by telephone. The line to one company holds. The line to the company beyond the orchard does not. Static crackles, then silence. The radio set intended as backup is temperamental. Batteries are affected by the cold. Antenna placement remains awkward in low ground. Signals manuals recommend ideal heights and clear fields around the aerial. The front does not provide them. The battalion commander does not raise his voice. He notes the lost line in a margin of his map. He looks at the artillery liaison officer sitting nearby, pencil behind his ear. The timetable for the forthcoming barrage sits between them. Timings are tight. Initial concentrations will fall beyond the orchard. Then, at set minutes, they will creep forward by small stages toward the ridge. Company commanders must know those timings precisely. They must know where the artillery will be at each moment. They must know the proper moment to advance from their start lines. Yet if the company beyond the orchard misses its time by even a few minutes, it risks stepping into its own fire. If it advances too late, the protecting pattern of shell bursts will move on, leaving men in open ground. The battalion commander leans over the artillery table. He recalculates the start of the barrage. There is still time to send corrections forward if they go now. The clerk beside him prepares new message forms. He copies the revised timings carefully. He notes the originator and the intended recipient. He marks the priority clearly. Only one method remains certain. A runner must carry the orders over ground he can see. The battalion commander calls for a runner. The word travels down a short stair to a small lean-to, where message carriers shelter by a wall. One stands, brushes straw from his trousers, and takes his helmet from a nail. His name is not recorded in the surviving paperwork. Only his role and the time are noted. Runner dispatched to forward company, orchard route, time recorded in pencil. He steps into the parlour-turned-command post. His boots leave faint damp marks on the cracked tiles. He waits while the clerk folds the message form and slides it into a small envelope. The clerk writes the destination in block letters. He notes the time of issue. His handwriting is steady from repetition, not from calm. The artillery liaison officer glances up. He watches the process with professional interest. If the message does not arrive, his carefully arranged fire plan will mean little. The runner tucks the envelope into his map case. The case already contains other papers, earlier orders, a simple sketch of the orchard, and drawn by another runner who walked it at dusk the previous day. A list of recognizable features, a single tall tree, a low wall, an irrigation ditch, a leaning telegraph post. Outside, the air smells of damp soil, cordite, and the faint sourness of uncollected refuse. Clouds hang low, visibility is adequate but dull. The orchard lies ahead, beyond a narrow lane and a low rise. The runner does not begin with a sprint. Routine has taught him that bursts of speed can draw attention. He moves at a controlled, steady pace along the side of the lane, keeping close to a ditch. Artillery from friendly batteries begins to test its range. Single shells fall in distant fields as guns adjust. The ground vibrates with each impact. Incoming fire from the enemy drops irregularly. They know an attack is likely. They shell road junctions, suspected observation posts, and any visible movement. The runner's task is simple in wording. Carry updated, timed orders from battalion to company command. In reality, it involves decisions at each step. Which side of a hedge offers better cover? Which depression is likely to hold water, slowing progress? Which segment of wire to step over and which to crawl under? The orchard presents a particular problem. It lies in a shallow bowl exposed to observation from the far ridge. Shelling has stripped many branches, leaving silhouettes that do little to hide movement. Field manuals often discuss ideal routes for messengers. Use dead ground, avoid obvious paths, stay close to walls and ditches. None of the manuals can account for every crater and fallen tree. Earlier in the day, another runner tried the orchard route. As he reached the near edge, shell bursts fell among the first trees. He pulled back and tried a longer flanking route. He took extra minutes. By the time he arrived, the company commander had already acted on outdated information. That experience is fresh in the message center's log. Today they need the orders delivered before the guns shift. The runner now approaching the orchard knows where the last man turned back. He remembers the conversation the previous night. They had traced routes with stubby pencils on the dirt floor of a dugout. The orchard always lay at the center of the sketch. Approaching its near edge, he slows. He listens for the rhythm of incoming rounds. There is a pattern, even in apparent chaos. Some batteries fire in steady sequences, others send scattered groups of shells. And infantry who have lived under barrages for months sometimes judge a lull by instinct, sometimes by the feel in their chest as much as by sound. He waits behind a broken wall, his breath visible. A set of shells lands beyond the orchard. Another falls short, near a drainage ditch. He checks his map case with a gloved hand, more to confirm the message is physically present than out of concern for the paper itself. Orders are nothing if they do not arrive. At battalion headquarters, the clerk notes the dispatch time again. If the message does not return with a receipt, the log will show a gap. That gap will later require explanation. Commanders will ask why orders were not acknowledged. The artillery liaison officer consults his watch. He knows how long it takes, in theory, to cover the distance to the forward company. Then he adds a margin for ground conditions. He listens to the guns, adjusts their preliminary fire. In higher headquarters, such delays are numbers in a report. At battalion level, they are measured in the time a man spends moving through a shelled orchard. The runner steps from cover into the trees. The orchard's remaining branches catch at his helmet. He stoops by habit, as much to lower his profile as to avoid splintered wood. The ground is uneven. Old furrows are now half-filled craters. Mud pulls at his boots. Every added kilogram of water adds effort and seconds. He moves in short bursts between trunks, not the straight line an ideal diagram might suggest, rather a broken pattern, always angling toward the far side, never standing too long in one place. Shells whistle overhead. Some land beyond. Sending fragments humming through branches, leaves, or what remains of them, flutter down as dust. The message in his map case has been written on thin paper to save weight and storage space. When damp, it tears easily. Runners learn to keep paper high under their coats during rain. They know how quickly ink blurs. At the far edge of the orchard, a shallow ditch offers partial cover. Beyond it, the ground rises slightly toward the forward company's positions. Their start line for the assault runs along a hedge and a low bank. As he approaches the ditch, a shell lands nearby. The shock throws soil, splinters, and fragments into the air. The runner drops into the ditch, pressed into mud. Training and repetition, rather than conscious thought, guide his hands. He covers his map case with his body. Her paper and watch are shielded by bone and cloth. Behind him, battalion headquarters hears only the dull thuds of distant impacts. No one can see his exact position. They rely on timing, not direct observation. The assault companies prepare at their start lines. Platoon leaders check weapons, adjust straps, and point out aiming stakes pounded into the ground earlier in darkness. They consult their pocket watches and cheap wristwatches, many privately purchased. Their understanding of the barrage's timings depends on the last orders received. Any changes must arrive before the first shells of the opening pattern fall. The runner raises his head. Dust drifts slowly back to earth. He feels for his helmet, places it squarely again, and wipes mud from the front lip so it does not drip into his eyes. The orchard's near edge now lies behind him. He must still cross open ground between the ditch and the start line. It is not far in distance, it is long in experience. Doctrine sometimes refers to this type of task as routine communication. The language is neutral. The reality is a man leaving a shallow ditch and moving across an exposed field with folded paper in his map case. He waits for another short lull, not absolute silence, but a relative drop in intensity. Then he climbs up, moves at a crouch, and covers the distance in a series of strides he has measured 100 times on exercise, but rarely in such conditions. The forward company's command post is a dugout cut into the rear of a bank. Boards support its roof. A blanket hangs over its entrance as a light baffle. Inside, the company commander bends over his own map, lit by a shaded lamp. He hears the canvas lift. A figure steps down, breath visible in the gloom. "Message from battalion," the runner says, his voice steady from effort, not ceremony. There is no flourish. He opens his map case, draws out the envelope, and hands it over. The company commander takes it, notes the time on his own watch, and breaks the seal. The updated timings are only slightly different from the earlier plan. A few minutes shift here, a slight adjustment of length there. But those minutes mark the difference between advancing under friendly fire and advancing into empty, exposed ground. He calls for his platoon leaders. They crowd into the dugout, shoulders brushing damp earth. He reads out the revised timings, tapping the table with a pencil to emphasize key moments. In the cramped space, the runner stands by the entrance, listening. He catches phrases about the orchard, about the line of advance, about recognizable trees that no longer have leaves. When the briefing ends, the company commander takes his message pad. He writes a brief acknowledgement. Received. Time. Signature. He folds it and hands it to the runner. The runner tucks the receipt into his case. He will carry it back to battalion. The log at the message center will gain a neat note. Orders delivered. Acknowledgement received. Outside, the preparatory bombardment begins in earnest. Guns behind the line open up in a coordinated pattern. Shells pass overhead with a layered sound that veterans can distinguish from incoming fire. The runner faces the orchard again, this time walking toward battalion. The ground has not changed. The shelling pattern has. Supporting guns now walk their fire forward in short increments. Enemy batteries respond with counter-shelling, searching for the origin of the attack. The orchard, lying between, receives fragments from both sides. There is no heroism in the way he moves, only method. He uses the ditch again. He counts the seconds between salvos. He chooses his steps carefully to avoid slipping in mud-filled holes he already knows. Back at battalion headquarters, the message center continues its own routine. The clerk records incoming reports from other companies. He marks them with reference numbers and files them in a box that once held civilian bills. On a shelf, a stack of used message books grows. Their duplicates bear the marks of pressure from past scribbles. Carbon paper between pages is smudged and worn. The battalion commander waits for confirmation. He's not idle. He checks other sectors on his map, speaks with the artillery liaison and answers a call from regiment, yet a part of his attention remains on the orchard route. No formal signal exists to indicate a runner's safe return. There is only the sound of boots on steps and the canvas being pushed aside at the farmhouse door. When the runner arrives, mud up to his knees, the clerk takes the acknowledgement first. He reads the time and notes it. He places the slip in a folder under the correct heading. Only then does he glance up at the runner's face. Faces change quickly in a sector like this. He silently counts who is still present from the original roster. In official summaries, this moment will not appear. Histories will mention artillery densities, frontage, so the axis of advance, and the number of hours engaged. Runners appear only as part of establishment tables, a small line in the organisation chart. Yet when telephones fail, when radios falter, and when flares cannot carry a detailed message, the battalion relies on them. As the assault begins, the runner returns once more toward the orchard. Now his task shifts. He may carry fragments of information backward, reports of initial positions reached, requests for more ammunition, notifications of casualties among officers. The orchard does not care for changed roles. Shells fall without regard to who carries orders forward or back. Infantry doctrine attempts to calculate acceptable delays. It speaks of time-weighted communication. Runners, by their nature, add minutes to every exchange. Yet the system attempts to compensate by sending them early and often. In practice, this means men constantly moving along the same dangerous paths. The orchard, the ditch, the low wall, the lane, each becomes familiar yet never safe. Over the course of the day, several runners traverse this ground. Some carry orders similar to the first. Others bring more urgent instructions, adjustments to the artillery plan, warnings of enemy reserves forming, directives from higher command insisting on specific objectives being reached. Each message is recorded, stamped and dispatched. Each runner signs a log or nods to a clerk who knows his handwriting well enough to note it for him. The strain shows slowly, not in dramatic displays, in small hesitations at the door before stepping outside. A link headquarters to companies, companies link headquarters to companies, companies to platoons. Reports are expected to flow steadily up and down. The reality in this orchard sector is uneven. Long gaps in information alternate with bursts of overlapping messages. Two runners may arrive within minutes of each other, their routes nearly identical, but their experiences entirely different. By afternoon, the assault has advanced beyond the orchard to the lower reaches of the ridge. Runners now face longer routes. They must travel past the old start line, through positions that only hours before held defending infantry. The ground has been reshelled by both sides. Yet some orders cannot wait for darkness. Counterattacks must be met with immediate adjustments. Artillery must be retimed to shift from one set of coordinates to another. A new message is drafted at battalion. Enemy movement has been observed assembling opposite the newly taken positions. The battalion commander issues a directive for immediate consolidation. He requests defensive fire to cover likely approach routes. Again, telephone and radio prove uncertain. Wires are cut by tracked vehicles moving up. Radio traffic is congested. Battery positions and higher headquarters flood the air with calls. A runner is called, perhaps the same as in the morning, perhaps another. The log records only that a runner is dispatched with updated defensive orders. That no extra note marks the fact that the orchard has already taken its toll over the last hours. He sets us off once more, this time with dusk approaching. Light fails slowly, smearing outlines, confusing distances. In low light, artillery flashes become more vivid. They throw brief, hard shadows over the orchard's torn trunks. He moves with care, boots now heavier from accumulated mud. Each step carries not only his own weight, but the weight of repeated journeys. Fatigue in runners is cumulative. Doctrine does not always acknowledge this. Establishment tables list one runner per company or several per battalion. Reality fills in the gaps with whomever is available and still moving. As the runner enters the orchard again, enemy artillery begins an interdiction pattern. Shells land on likely routes between the new front line and the battalion headquarters. Road junctions, orchards, lane exits. He recognizes the pattern from earlier periods of the war. Several impacts in quick succession, a pause, then another cluster. He adjusts his pace, sometimes waiting when the instinct says to move, sometimes moving when instinct says to wait. In moments like this, the gap between official doctrine and lived experience grows clear. Field manuals cannot capture the feel of splinters cutting into bark. They cannot describe the way a man calculates whether to cross open ground before or after the next impact. He reaches the far side again. The company command post has moved forward slightly, keeping pace with the assault. Its current location is not on the original map. Someone has penciled in a revised position. Finding it is part of the runner's task. He asks brief questions, receives curt gestures toward a shell hole or a new dugout. He follows a chain of hand signals through men focused on fields of fire, not map references. Once more, he delivers his envelope. Once more, a commander reads, adjusts his plan, calls his subordinate leaders. The runner waits for acknowledgement, then turns back. Artillery and small arms fire intensify as enemy counterattacks begin. Tracer lines stitch the air. Mortar rounds fall with a different sound from larger shells. Runners quickly learn to distinguish between shapes and noises. He uses a new route to avoid predictable lines of fire. It is longer, skirting a shallow depression, crossing a section of wire that sags close to the ground. He moves more slowly, but each step is chosen. Behind him, though the infantry companies dig in along the new line, they scrape at frozen soil and wet mud. They align their fields of fire with the protective arcs of artillery planned from battalion. The messages he carries allow those arcs to align with reality. At headquarters, the message center now displays a map with pins and small notes. Some of those notes exist only because handwritten orders made it through the orchard and back. Without them, the battalion staff would be working on outdated assumptions. As evening settles fully, communication becomes more complicated. Runners must navigate both enemy fire and friendly security measures. Sentinels along routes challenge any movement. Passwords change according to pre-arranged schedules. And a runner moving after midnight must remember not only his route, but the correct response to a whispered challenge. He must do so under the influence of exhaustion and under the pressure of shells that do not adhere to schedules. In the days before the assault, higher headquarters may have discussed communications in clean phrases, redundant systems, alternative routes, contingency plans. In the orchard sector, redundancy translates to men willing or assigned to cross open ground multiple times under fire. Occasionally, runners do not return. Their absence is felt first in the small space where they normally sit, gear hanging from a nail. Their name, if noted, appears on a casualty list compiled by the battalion clerk. In some battalions, those lists are written on the reverse of old message forms when proper paper runs short. Their names share space with half-visible carbon copies of past orders. Ink fades or runs when damp. Where records survive, they show numbers. Runners killed, runners wounded, runners missing. They rarely note the specific ground crossed or the details of orchards, walls and ditches. For the men still carrying messages, each trip remains particular. They remember individual trees, specific craters, and the smell of spent propellant hanging low over certain fields when the wind drops. In addition to formal orders, runners carry informal observations. They mention to a clerk that the line forward of the orchard is thinner than the map suggests. They pass along that one platoon has lost several experienced non-commissioned leaders. These remarks may not appear on any message pad, but they shape how staff officers interpret the next report. And as the assault stabilizes into a new brittle line, the role of runners shifts again. They carry requests for tools, wire, rations, and so on medical supplies. They bring back casualty returns and ammunition expenditure figures. Artillery fire continues to fall intermittently on the orchard. Even when major operations pause, both sides use habitual targets to disrupt movement. The orchard remains a logical place to shell. It lies on the path between the new front line and the battalion headquarters. In higher war diaries, the day's fighting might be summarized in a few sentences. Line advance to ridge, enemy resistance moderate to heavy, casualties as yet unconfirmed. Those diaries often mention artillery and tonnage and raids in terms of company boundaries. That they rarely specify that revised timed orders reached one assault company because a runner crossed a shelled orchard, and that another unit suffered heavier losses where similar messages did not. Communication systems in the war relied on layers. Radio, wire, visual signals, and messengers all interlocked. Failures in one system increased pressure on the others. When cables were cut, traffic on the runner network increased. When batteries for radios ran low, more paper moved by hand. When artillery intensified, those paper messages became more precarious. In some armies, manuals acknowledged this reality. They allocated extra runners during periods of heavy fighting. In practice, units often improvised. Men temporarily not engaged directly in firing might be ordered to carry a single message. They became, for that moment, a part of the communication chain. The battalion runner in the orchard sector belongs to a group whose work appears between the lines of official history. Their tasks are practical. Carry this, return with that, record the time. The risk involved does not arise from a dramatic gesture, but from repetition. The more often a man walks the same ground under observed artillery, the higher his chances of being caught by a random burst. By the time fighting moves beyond the ridge and the orchard becomes part of the rear again, its trees will be further reduced. Many will stand only as stumps. Telephone wire will lie in tangled loops among roots and craters. Later patrols may pass through it without realizing how many times a runner measured its length in careful steps. They will see broken trunks and brown grass, but not the invisible lines of communication that once ran from ditch to wall to dugout. In the months and years after the war, training manuals and doctrinal studies would analyze communication failures and successes. They would note the importance of rapid, reliable information flow between echelons. Some would recommend more radios, better cables, improved encryption. Few would devote more than a paragraph to runners. Yet those paragraphs acknowledge that when mechanical systems failed, human carriers remained the final guarantee. Archives today preserve message pads, envelopes, and fragments of orders from battalion sectors like this orchard line. Faded stamps show origin and priority. Smudged signatures mark receipt. Some bear water stains, perhaps from the same ditches runners threw themselves into to avoid shells. Each piece of paper once travelled in a map case or inside a tunic pressed close to a man's chest as he crossed ground under observation. The ink lines that seemed so thin and fragile on the page once represented minutes shaved or lost, objectives gained or missed, shells shifted forward or held back. The battalion runner, whose face rarely appears in wartime newsreels, carried those lines through mud orchards and ruined lanes as part of his routine. His work did not normally earn medals or public mention. It was expected. Commanders at battalion and company level understood its importance clearly. They experienced directly what happened when orders failed to reach the front in time or when casualty reports did not come back in sufficient detail. The orchard assault is one among many on one front among several. But it illustrates a pattern repeated in towns, forests and fields across the war. Artillery shapes the ground, doctrine shapes the plan. Runners connect the two, bridging the gap between maps and men with timed orders written on damp paper. Years after the war, some veterans would recall not the words of the messages, but the routes taken to carry them. A particular tree stump, a shallow dip that had always collected water, a low wall that offered just enough cover if one pressed close. The war's grand narratives often focus on divisions, armies and campaigns. Within those large movements, battalions fought their own measured battles. Within those battalions, runners kept communication alive by making the same small decisions again and again under fire. Their legacy lies not in monuments, but in the fact that so many operations proceeded at all despite broken wires, failing radios and shelled orchards. It is present in the quiet, matter-of-fact lines of after-action reports that mention orders delivered under heavy fire, without elaboration. For those who study the war's overlooked aspects, the figure of the battalion runner in a shelled orchard stands as a reminder of how much depended on individuals performing dangerous repetitive tasks without display. He moved between the regiment's theories on paper and the company's reality in trenches and fields, carrying instructions that could not wait. To continue exploring these less noticed roles and routines of the war, you may choose to follow this channel for future stories.